All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Too Many Hobbies. I am your host, Brian Althorpe. Today's episode, we're going to be wrapping up the late goose season here in Ohio and discussing how that went for us. So let's get into the show. All right, guys, thank you for tuning back into another episode. The hunts that I'm going to be reviewing today and discussing are all posted on YouTube right now. The last hunt just went up yesterday, and yeah, they all turned out pretty well. I mean, the videos themselves turned out really good. We were able to get a couple extra cameras on the last hunt, and then the two hunts before that also had two different views on them, which was really cool to do. Luckily, Jeff has a GoPro as well and was running it during these hunts, so got some different perspective on those hunts. If you guys want to check those videos out, they are on YouTube at Brian Althorpe Media. Make sure you guys check the videos out, subscribe, all that good stuff. I'm also putting the Too Many Hobbies podcast episodes on YouTube just as the audio files for now until I start doing video. And at the moment, I am working on trying to get a good spot up here in this office so that I can have a decent background and it's not just a bare wall. So hopefully we can get that hashed out pretty soon. I've got new cameras, new lenses, all that good stuff. And I'll actually be talking about that in the next episode when I talk about different equipment that I've bought this year to do more weddings. So let's get into the topic for today, which is the late goose season. Our duck season we already talked about. That ended really well. And transitioning from that into late goose season was pretty interesting because we got a massive cold snap just after the new year, and that really pushed a lot of birds around. Well, it kind of centered a lot of birds around open water, and that's kind of what we started targeting. In most years, I'm always looking for big groups of birds, always trying to find the biggest area to traffic them, going out to my private pond out in Delta, and there's always a ton of birds out there. But after some scouting at the beginning of the late goose season, we decided that we were going to start targeting much smaller groups of birds, and that actually worked out really, really well for us throughout the entire late goose season. Around here, there was just so many people this year that were hunting the late goose season, and particularly in the marsh behind my house, they were using that a lot. There was a lot of birds that were running from the Cedar Point National Wildlife Refuge over to Maumee Bay State Park, and it's no secret that everybody likes to go in there and try and traffic those birds. So after seeing all that, we decided that we were going to shy away from, we hunted it once, and that was more of just that was out of what am I trying to say here? It was an easy hunt. We were trying not to make it too difficult, so we just decided to walk back there and see what we could do. There were birds in there, and last year, the late goose season, it was, the marsh itself was pretty much frozen until about the last 2 weekends of the season. And then I went in there and was shooting geese in the afternoons because they were using it as a roost. And for anybody that wasn't watching that area, they wouldn't have known that the geese were using it as a roost. I think that a lot of people this year, just because of the boom in our area with the hunting and stuff due to all the COVID stuff and everybody being out of work and having all this extra time to hunt, a lot of people just look at the Mallard Club as like an easy way to get out and try to shoot birds. And it's not a bad spot to be in the late goose season if you want to shoot something. but you can't expect them to work you and like actually decoy in. You're going to get a lot of, you're just trafficking birds, you're just pass shooting. And I don't think, it's not my favorite way to hunt, trafficking birds. I would rather, I mean, I'm sure everybody else would too, but I work harder to find birds that I can decoy than traffic birds. So once we realized that place was completely, we were out of commission there. We're not going to be able to hunt that. We started finding smaller areas. There's 3, 4, 5 rivers that come right through Northwest Ohio. So we started finding small bodies of water off the rivers and trying to find spots that geese were roosting. Not roosting, loafing, either way. And so we were scouting around like lunchtime, trying to find these birds that were just sitting in these areas, and we were finding groups of like 40 to 60. And so we were starting to target those. So once we did enough scouting, I didn't hunt the first weekend of late goose. The following weekend is when we started targeting the first small group of birds that we found. And the spot that we hunted isn't very well known. It was a small little channel off of a main river. And this channel was wide enough that these birds were able to sit there comfortably, but it wasn't near anything else. Like there's no there's like some marinas and stuff around it, and they weren't really sitting in those marinas. Sometimes in the late season you'll see a lot of geese in the marinas around us, and these birds were just sitting down in this small chunk of water. And actually in this area at the time it was freezing. Everything around it was freezing, and there was just this small pocket of water, and we could really only get there with the kayaks. We could have probably taken a boat, but it was a little too shallow. So we got there at like 7 o'clock, I think. We weren't expecting birds to move very early, just because the ones that we had seen in this area were using it as a loaf, and it was pretty much like we were seeing them around like lunchtime. So me and Jeff go there. I have my kayak with the layout blind on it. He has his kayak. He has a trolling motor on his. So that worked out nicely to break up the ice that we were going through. And the spot that we were in just had high cattails, and we were right on the edge of this small channel. When we didn't realize it, but once we got there and started setting up, there was like 20 geese came out of the cattails like 30 yards from us and flew off. So they were already there, and they were already sitting there, whether they roosted there overnight or whatever. And we didn't get a shot off on them, but Jeff loads one shell in his gun trying to shoot them. And so we sit there, we get set up around like, it had to have been like 7:45, and 7:45, 8 o'clock. We're set up, we're sitting there, and then at like 8:30, we heard a single goose, and it was flying over us, or we thought it was flying over us, and we're both looking up into the air because it sounded like it was flying above us. Out of the corner of my eye, I see this goose just dump into our decoys at like 10 yards. So we both shoot. Jeff doesn't realize that he has only one shell in his gun because we only took one shot at these geese, or at this goose, sorry. So he just loads one shell back into his gun. We go out, get the goose, and then like 15 minutes later, or another half hour later, I think it was like 9 o'clock, we have this group of 6 come right up over the power lines on the other side of the river and just lock up, come right in. So these were birds that we had seen sitting there using it as a loaf. And I mean, we only had 24 decoys out just because we had only seen like 40 in this spot. So we weren't going to try to make it too crazy and put 60 or 70 floaters out there. Plus we couldn't fit them in the kayak. So we put out these 24. These 6 came right in at like 12 yards, 15 yards. I sit up. Jeff takes one shot. He thought that he hit the one. We thought we hit the same one. So this first bird goes down, and Jeff keeps trying to shoot. And he's only got that one shell in his gun, so he only shoots once. I end up tripling on these geese. And it sucks because if Jeff would have had his gun loaded, we probably would have shot more of them out of that group. But so I triple. We have 4 geese, and it's 9 o'clock. And we weren't sure that birds were even moving this early. We just had happened to get there early because we were so unsure that we figured we'd play it safe. And we're both sitting there and we go, man, it'd be awesome if we were done. If 2 more came in, we were done at 9:15. So literally at 9:10, a pair of geese come up over the same power lines from the same area and just dump straight in, even closer than the other ones. And we dropped both of those because Jeff luckily had 3 shells in his gun this time. And so we were done at 9:15. It was unbelievable, but it just goes to show like that we put the time in and we were checking areas. I was checking different rivers. Jeff was checking spots, and we were trying to target smaller groups of geese, and we only needed 6 birds. We knew that we were going to be hunting together, so we only needed 6. So why go try and find 400 or 500 birds that we know aren't going to decoy when we can find 40 that we can pick off of, smaller groups and actually convince geese to decoy. I mean, we had birds trying to land on skim ice in front of us. Our decoys were completely locked up in the ice, and they just didn't care. I mean, at first goose that came in it had already landed. It landed on the skim ice, and it just goes to show you that if the birds are using an area, you can hope, well, more times than not, you're going to be able to pattern the geese. The geese aren't as finicky as the ducks are. If the geese like an area, they're going to use it until there's something that pushes them out of that area. So we got out of there quick, hoping that, if there was other birds in that area, we weren't going to scare them off, and they would, the rest of them would stay there, and we could target them another day. So the following weekend, we ended up hunting the marsh by my house for the first day. We're sitting there, and you can just see on the lake, the fog just rolls in so slow. And I mean, it ends up covering the entire marsh. We can't see anything. We can barely see the last decoys that we have out. We only have a dozen out. That day we only had 1 group, and they just did a flyby. Like, they flew over. Me and Jeff had both our dogs there. Boomer did not like the ice, so he didn't go and get the 1 bird that we shot. But Jeff's dog, Lucy, was able to get her first goose. She doesn't seem to care about the ice. So that was really cool. That was worth going out. I only stayed out until like 9 o'clock, I think, that day anyway. The day after that, we went back to the same spot that we had hunted the weekend before. We brought Damien with us, and that day that area of the river had completely melted all the ice. So there's a lot more open water in that area, which was funny because the marsh that we hunted was completely frozen solid. So we go back to this river, and it's wide open. We have a big group of geese to our right, and that was directly in between where we were getting birds to come from the time before, which really, really screwed us because we had birds that were locked up coming in, and as soon as they would clear the trees and they could see up the river, they would turn and go with those geese. And we had 1 group of 3 come in at like 10, 12 yards. So we had a really good shot on those. We shot all 3 of them. And that's in the second video. Can see the flyover from the marsh. Can see those 3 that came in. And I mean, as long as I get to shoot at something, I don't mind. Like, I'm not out there to try and I don't get mad if I don't shoot my limit of birds and all that. It is a lot more fun, obviously, when you're shooting more birds. But I mean, as long as we convince something to come in, like, that's a success for me. So both days I thought were good. We were one of like 4 groups in the marsh, and we were able to convince those birds to come to us through the fog, which was just pure calling. And my calling's not the greatest. I don't do a bunch of trick notes and stuff. I just do clucks and moans, and it works. So I've tried to do different stuff with it, but I just try to keep it simple as well. Those 3, I'm pretty sure they saw the decoys, but I did do a little bit of calling just to get them, see if it would help. I just started blowing. They came right in. So that was awesome. Now, the last hunt that we did was this past weekend. It was the last weekend of the late goose season. We had hunted this spot the weekend before, and I knew that there was birds using this area. I work right near where I was hunting. So but I was driving up and down the river, and there was just thousands of birds up and down the river. And it's just hard to find when it's this late in the late goose season. If it's cold, everything locks up. Like, the whole river locks up. And there's only a few spots where there's going to be open water. So what we did is we hunted this area the weekend before, and so it's 2 weekends ago. And we hunted it in the morning. Like, we got up there at like 7 o'clock. There's a freaking blizzard, so we got there later than we wanted to anyway. But there was so much snow. It was unbelievable. And we had a really bad wind. Couldn't even look to our right just because the wind was so brutal in the snow. We couldn't see any birds that way. Like, you couldn't look that way that long. It was just so cold. I think it was like 15 degrees or something, 14 degrees. It was just brutal. And we didn't have a lot of birds work. We had no birds work us, but we didn't see many birds in general in the morning. So what I did is, after we got skunked that day, we had 4 that worked in, but they were in the tree line, and the snow was blowing so hard that we didn't see them until they were like almost at the decoys, and they swung out, and we thought they were going to try to come back into the wind, and they ended up like swinging out and then landing like 60 yards out. So we didn't end up shooting those, unfortunately. But I was scouting all week. I was driving up and down the river on my lunch break, and there was just birds everywhere, but they were flying later in the day. Like, they were flying at like noon, 1, 2 o'clock. So we decided is for the last day of our season here in Ohio, which I don't understand why they do this, but it's on a Saturday. So we ended up hunting that Saturday. This was last Saturday. And it was just, it was really cold. I think it was 12 degrees when we got there. And I mean, it was brutal. But there was so much ice that had locked up all around us that we were in some of the only open water, and I knew that they were using this area in the afternoon. And I mean, there was goose poop everywhere. I'd seen them in the afternoons. And so this was a loafing area that we were using. We were sitting right on an ice shelf, sitting in some brush. And there was 4 of us. It was me, Jeff, Damien, and Damien's dad. So we get there, and me and Jeff just decided we're going to throw out as many decoys as we possibly can. So when you're driving up and down the river, you see these huge groups of geese. I mean, there's like 200 birds, 300 birds in each group. And the only times that you're seeing geese land with them is these big groups. If there's smaller groups up and down the river, they're not landing with these smaller groups. So we decided that we're going to take like 150 decoys, which I think we were somewhere around 150, maybe more than that. But I mean, we had floaters, shells, full bodies, silhouettes. We had everything. And between like, I think we had gotten set up by 2 o'clock. And 5 minutes after we set up, we had a group of like 12 come in. And I don't know what it is about these people and their guns, but Damien's dad gave Damien 3 shells because they were shooting 3.5s, but then never put 3 in his gun. So when we had this group come in, he sat up to shoot, and he had geese at like maybe 15 yards, probably closer than that. And he said they pulled up and racked it, clicked, realized they never put shells in his gun. Damien's gun got stuck in his blind, so me and Jeff sit up and we start shooting right away. And then Damien shoots, and I think between 3 of us we dropped 4. The worst part about that hunt was that we had 2 cripples. As soon as that group came in, we had 2 more groups that were flying above us. So me and Jeff get out, and we're trying to chase these geese, but we're also trying to like stay down so that the other groups can try and work in. But at that time, we only had 2 that were stone cold dead, and we had 2 that were crippled going across the river. So I run across the river and never catch up to this goose until I get like on the bank. So I'm on the bank and I realize that I'm in a park. So I leave my gun at the edge of the river so I'm not tempted to shoot it in the park. And I follow this goose. I can see its tracks going through the snow. So I follow this thing through the snow into a ditch, and I see it sitting there, and as soon as I slide into the ditch, it tries to fly away. And its wings get stuck in the tree, and I literally football tackled it into the ditch. And I felt so ridiculous tackling a goose, but I had made it that far, and I was dying. I was so out of breath. It was so cold that my lungs were just on fire. So Jeff gets his cripple, I get this one. We come back, and I think we shot between 2 and 4. That seemed to be when these geese were like really wanting to use this area. We had another group of like 10 come in. We dropped a few out of that. And then we had another group of 4 come in. And in that second group, one of them we hit, it landed, and then when I went out to get it, flew away and flew right over into a field. Like over, it was gone. That thing had bulletproof vest on it, so it was gone. So we had 6 after the first 2 groups, and then we had a group of 4 that came in, and all of us had our guns loaded. Luckily, no issues there, and yeah, because in the second group, Jeff never loaded his gun again. He needs to figure that out. If he's going to keep hunting with me, he needs to figure out how to load his gun. So, Jeff, if you're listening, load your gun. And the group of 4, we knocked all 4 of them down. And then after that, it seemed like there was a group hunting a field like down the street from us. And every time we'd hear them shoot, about 3 minutes later, we'd see geese flying over us, and they just hightailed it right into town. They didn't care about us, and we really struggled to get anything to decoy after that. And I don't think it had anything to do with what we were doing. We didn't change anything, but it just seemed to be like at that time there was a certain place that they wanted to be where they were roosting or whatever. And it was just hard to get them to work after that. But we ended up shooting 10 geese that day. So, we were only 2 shy of a 4-man limit. And, for the last day of goose season, to me, that's really good. I don't really have a lot of luck the last day of the season. Seems to be that last day that something happens where, like, I'm hunting, I don't see anything, I start packing up, and then geese fly over exactly where I was sitting, or something like that. That's just a sign that the the season's over and I need to just go home. But this day worked out a lot better. We put a lot more work into it. We really got technical with it. We even moved our trucks. We were hunting right off of a parking lot. And I mean, normally I wouldn't really think about normally if you're in a field, you think about it, but it's weird when you're sitting on the edge of a river where you just don't think that your car matters. So we moved all the trucks. We had had a good hide. We had an incredible decoy spread. I mean, we had like little islands that we had decoys on. It looked insane, and it worked out really, really well. Like the geese came in so close that the last group of 4, we even said like if we hadn't shot them, they were gonna land on the ice like at our feet, and we shot them at like 8 yards. So that just tells you. I mean, like I watched these birds for weeks, and then that last week, I was really trying to dial in. I sat there and just watched birds land and how they worked in, and just pretty much replicated exactly what I had seen when I was watching them, and it worked out great. So that's the recap of our late goose season. It really wasn't. It was productive for us, but I mean, like as far as numbers of birds, it wasn't anything to write home about. I mean, 20 birds in the late season really isn't a lot to most people. I know a lot of guys that were hunting fields in the last couple weeks, and they were shooting 15, 18 geese a day. But those were in private fields, and I don't know, there's just something about shooting geese on water that I'm always going to do that as opposed to try and shoot them in a field. It's just, I like shooting them in fields. Don't get me wrong, but when I see them landing on water, it's so cool. But when I have to chase them 400 yards across a river, that really sucks. So we're going to try to not do that again. But yeah, it was a good late goose season. I'm glad that we spent the time that we did and like got technical with it, and it felt pretty rewarding at the end of it. I'm glad that it's over. I miss it, but I'm glad that it's over. Need to fix the stuff that I've broken this year, which seems to be pretty much everything. I have a boat out of commission. I have decoys that got blasted. There's just a lot to do, and I mean we've got plenty of time until it comes back in, but we'll get covered with fishing here pretty soon, and that'll take over our lives throughout the summer. So appreciate you guys tuning in. If you made it this far, make sure that you guys subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure you guys rate the podcast if you haven't already. Leave a rating, a review. Let me know what you guys think about the show. If there's anything that you guys want me to cover in future episodes, please let me know. And that's a wrap. So we will catch you guys on the next episode.